I brought an example of a project we did called A Letter of Columbus. And this book was inspired from a letter that was given to me, the translation in English, from the original Spanish letter that was the first correspondence from Columbus back to the Old World on his maiden voyage heading back home to announce his discovery. And it was like landing on the moon. He was known, Columbus was known as the modern Prometheus, that he'd discover Eden. It was such a major discovery, like landing on the moon. It was a very popular letter. It had been published in many formats in the 1493, the year he returned, in Latin and Italian, as poetry, not to mention its first printing was in Spanish. But so that we celebrated in 1992 the quincentenary of the Columbus discovery of the Americas, and so we did a project based on that letter.
The historical artifact, and then now you've kind of created that's your concept, and then on that you've got all these layers of the different disciplines contributing to this
well, it was the inspiration.
Right.
And we brought together an artist, a calligrapher, a paper maker, and I worked with a binder. Although we had volunteers and students who helped execute the entire project, the artist, as a matter of fact, Anthony Rice, that illustrated this poem, it ended up a long poem, the letter cast off as a poem, was a teacher at Ringling School of Art and Design here in Sarasota, who I had collaborated with before on a couple of books. And when I approached him and asked him if he wanted to do that project, he was quite excited. And we brought him up to Columbus, Ohio, to Ohio State for a little over a month, put him up, fed him, and every day came to the shop and worked with some assistants who volunteered, students and some other volunteers, to hand paint basically every copy.
I would think as an artist, which I would not consider myself an artist, I like to dabble in doing artistic things, but for an artist, like you said, he was excited. I could see why they would be excited, because there's so much depth to the project, and it's such a collaborative effort that it's just exciting. It's almost ridiculously complex in its conception and execution.
Well, we make it a little easier for people to appreciate by putting at the end of almost every book I've ever published, printed and published, we have in the back what's known as a colophon. This tells the story of the book that you're holding in your hand. Who did it, when, why, what the type was, what the paper is, and everything. And this has a watermark. I don't think we can see it real easily here.
We'll get some
but I don't think you can. But there's a watermark portrait of Columbus in one corner, and in the other corner there's a dove or a bird with a branch in its mouth is the other watermark that we made.
So what he's holding up here is, it's a book as you would think, but the paper was made by hand.
All of it from Spanish flax.
All the typeset was laid by hand and rolled and,
yeah,
and
printed.
A lot of art in the book itself.
The title page, for instance, has some gold leaf on it. It also has hand lettering. This black title is all hand lettered by Analia Woods, who's the calligrapher on the project. And she did 11 initial letters by hand in every copy.
Wow.
Every copy. And then this illustration of the elephant, there's an elephant with a serpent and a dragon. And that's from the Chinese, it's based on the Chinese creation myth. And it's on the title page because, Columbus thought he was going to China. And then there are lines, these lines on the title page, maybe you can see, that crisscross. those look like they are nautical, one would think. But actually, they are the basis for the ideal book. And they describe where and how the text block is supposed to sit on the page. And it's part of the design of the book.
That's a little inside joke.
Yes, it's a pun almost, really.
Right.
And the binding, these stitchings here, this is called a long stitch, which shows the stitching is exhibited on the outside of the book, so we're not hidden. You see it? That's supposed to represent all the different lines, and the stitching is on the outside of the book rather than on the inside, and so it represents the stays and all the ropes that go on a ship, just like a ship. And so there's a lot of symbolism throughout the book. Like here, the book starts with an initial letter. It's what's called a historiated initial letter, and it's made up of a horse and a watermelon. The watermelon being the crossbar on the letter H for the word highnesses, which is the first word in the long letter or poem, prose poem. And
there's a lot of sense of humor in the whole
thing. It is. There is. There's even more. I'll tell you a couple other ones. But this, it represents the fact that the horse had pretty much disappeared from the Americas. Columbus, and followed by, after Columbus, Cortez and others brought the horse to the Americas for the first time. And the watermelon was brought back by him to Europe. They had no watermelons. So it represents that exchange of civilizations. And then throughout the book, we have all these illustrations. So the type here is hand set and printed. We dampened the paper and printed it all by hand. And the lettering, the initial letters for each page, is hand drawn in each book. And here's a shark. Now these are monoprints, which means the way this is printed is the artist paints on a metal plate, the sheet's printed, and then the artist has to paint again. There are some marks on the plate that carry some of the image from one printing to the next, but by and large, the colors and a lot of the marks are created and then they have to be done by hand again. So this book, when it was created, was done much the way books were done at the very beginning of printing. When only thing that was printed was the type. Everything else still had to be done by hand. The paper made by hand, the binding by hand, the illustrations and initial letters, all still done by hand. Right?
Incredible.
And the concept for this book was based on the fact that Columbus kept two versions of the ship's log. One was he kept in secret, and the other he showed to the crew. And so he had one, he lied in one of them because the crew got nervous that they were never going to see land and they would never get back again. They were scared. Anyway, he finishes his letter, but then he added a postscript a month later to the letter before he sent it back to Spain, because he stopped in Portugal to see the king and queen of Portugal, where he had gone first for the money to get ships built, and they turned him down, and so he went to Spain and got him from Queen Isabella. But he stopped in Portugal to see if he could get some money to go back. They turned him down again. And he made a beeline back to Spain, but not before which he wrote to Queen Isabella saying, "I'm sorry I was delayed because of bad weather." It wasn't true. But we put this map in here as a separation between the main part of the letter and the postscript. And in the corner, in red lettering, in Chinese calligraphy, it says "secret map." And it's supposed to represent his way to China that he carried with him. But this copy represents his copy that he kept for himself and doodled the pictures in the margins that he wasn't showing anybody else. So then
Is that a different artist than that did all the illustrations on the pages?
all the illustrations on the pages here and the map were done by Anthony Rice, who's still teaching, I believe, at Ringling.
Wow.
I think he's taught there over 40 years.
Incredible.
He's a good printmaker and good artist. And the postscript is quite interesting. And here we have, for instance, in this illustration, a bird and a picture of the moon reflected in the water. And the bird is like one of those birds you see on the beach that goes back and forth, and they leave those little bird's feet marks in the sand. And this image represents the idea that the bird marks are like stars in the heavens.
Yeah.
So
It's so, the whole thing's so clever. And it's so
and here we've bent
incredible.
the foredge of the binding. This is called a yap. So when you shut your book, you shut your
Yeah.
yap. And that's actually a term from a man named Yap. And it used to be that old books would have this yap and then a little bone and a hook here that would keep it shut.
Yes.
The box we made, this box, the paper we made from an anchor rope.
Wow.
Big, thick, about a 3.5, 4-inch thick anchor sisal hemp rope that we had to cook and lye twice and wash it and then beat it to pulp. And then we made a paste paper that shows a bird with a branch in its mouth and waves, ocean waves.
How was that put on there?
On this paper,
Yeah.
it's a goo we make with paint and what do you call it? A little binder, like in a little acrylic, and then we had a rubber stamp of a bird, and we had a big brush, and we would slop this on the paper. Then one of the students would make the wave mark, and the other would come along with the stamps and put them on the with the rubber stamp.
Wow.
We made the rubber stamp.
Yeah. Well, of course.
Yeah.
And what's that little medallion on the front or whatever that
And there's an inlaid bas-relief, hand-cast paper bas-relief of the title page imagery of the elephant with the dragon and the serpent. Because the idea of the Chinese creation myth is that the universe sits on the back of an elephant, and the serpent, it represents time. And when the dragon slays the serpent, the blood becomes the heavens, and the flesh of the serpent becomes the firmament, and begins time.
So the detail is not only on the creation and the execution of it and the skill of it, but the details got to be right too. You got to have
Everything's got to line up.
Yeah.
Everything has to line up.